Like, we won't even go there until I get a really clear idea from the people who are constantly on the front lines talking to the people that are being served, and dealing with objections and all the problems and frequently asked questions, and say, okay, what kind of stories do we need to tell related to, what our customers care about, what they're struggling with, or, what they're hesitant around not buying the solution or going to this thing or using this product or service.
Your business's success depends on relationships with customers, relationships with employees, and relationships with stakeholders. What do they all have in common? They're all human. Because no matter if your business is B2B or B2C, it's really H to H, human to human. Welcome to the Human Connection Podcast. I'm your host, Karl Pontau. Each week, I'll bring you stories, insights, and practical advice from experts that you can apply to your growing company and daily life. This week, I'm excited to connect with René Frojo. René Frojo is a brand storytelling specialist and strategist focused on helping purpose-led founders and fractionals craft authentic narratives that connect and convert. She specializes in uncovering powerful stories, aligning them with business goals, and developing content strategies that build trust and authority. Her work also includes teaching thought leaders and teams how to use storytelling to create lasting impact through consistent, meaningful messaging. Congrats on developing content strategies that build trust and authority, and welcome to the Human Connection Podcast.
Thank you, Karl. Did I write that or did you write that?
You wrote that.
That's good. I like it.
Yeah, who knew? So what's the biggest mistake that companies make when trying to tell stories on social media? Because I see so many companies struggle with that, but I'm sure you have a great insights onto the biggest mistake you see companies make.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest mistake is that they don't actually tell stories, or they don't tell enough stories, or they don't know where to find their stories, or they don't know which stories to tell. And then it just results in content that struggles to stand out or really connect or resonate with their ideal audience, and ends up either following trends and just hopping on that bandwagon and sounding like everybody else. It's a really powerful tool. I tell people all the time, you're not trying to get people to buy something, you're trying to get them to buy into something. And storytelling is the way to do it.
That's a great distinction, that it's not about getting people to buy all the time. It's about getting them to buy into something. So much of what businesses seem to be focused on is just getting that next sale, that next click, that next transaction, not on building the relationships. And that's what storytelling is perfect for. It's what storytelling was invented to do, is to build those relationships.
To build relationships, to make meaning out of things. It's really to communicate and connect more effectively. I think it's all those things. I share the stat in these workshops that I always give that it's made its way around the internet, but stories are 22 times more memorable than facts alone, right? Because of all the things that are happening in our brains when we tell stories, all the connections that are being made. It's just all about connection at the end of the day.
Yeah, I definitely talk with people about like mirror neurons and empathy, and how your brains can't tell the difference between a story and reality. That's why if you watch a horror film and you see the hero getting chased by a monster, your heart starts pounding, you start sweating, but you're sitting in a movie theater eating popcorn, not being chased by a monster. But to your brain, it's the exact same thing. So when you're working with a company, what's like an example of a time where you were working with a company who was making these sort of mistakes, and how did you turn it around for them?
Yeah. Well, one of the first stories I told online, it was the story of how I told a story about a tomato to get a job. So my last full-time job was at this really well-known and beloved organization in San Francisco called Off the Grid. And maybe you've been to an Off the Grid event, but they started as like the street food organizer. They have a community and collective of food trucks, and they put on big events. And then they also have, then expanded into catering and doing all these other interesting things. But when I came in, they were really struggling to tell the story of Off the Grid, find effective stories, and really engage their community and their 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 businesses, the collaborative, like the other food trucks, which were the biggest sources of like marketing for them, right? Amplifying their message. Like they were really struggling to connect all these pieces, and what it became was I kind of was riding the trend of like food porn that was happening on the internet. Right? With like BuzzFeed and everything. It was like food porn. It was like you could do the most ridiculous things. And that's like what it became. And that's what their social media and their communication channels were. And I was like, all these businesses are family owned businesses. They're all immigrant businesses. They have like these rich, rich stories of why they're doing this. Like it's food at the end of the day. It's like we connect so much through food, and there's so much story and history and nostalgia and like just so many opportunities for that connection that are just being completely missed. So that's where we started. I was like, let's start getting the stories of these food vendors and telling them, and then having them reshare them and build a different kind of community here and following that. That's not just like, no, what's the most like ridiculous, snow cone topped ube matcha latte that we can like capture attention with. And it really took off. I mean, I don't have the stats off the top of my head, but they're on my LinkedIn profile and my resume somewhere. But newsletter rates increased by 30%. They were at 6% open, and I got them, over like close to 40% open rate for the newsletter that they had for 8 years in 6 months, just because I started telling stories, right, and making it more engaging and having more of a reason for people to read it and open it and engage. They had to shut down during the pandemic. They couldn't host these live events. And we got 10,000 people to come to the opening, which was like its biggest opening ever. We got it in all the news media outlets. And I grew their social media accounts by 10K, had a really popular blog. So that was really, I feel like a success story. And it was all because I focused on this human connection piece, the storytelling. Yeah. You told the story of Matt, the founder, and like the origin story, and the story of the tomato that got me the job. I actually wrote it it was in an email to him after I had applied. And I was like, this is kind of how I see one story we could tell, because they were launching this new initiative. I was like, we follow the tomato. It's like we follow the tomato from the fields to, to the distributor, to the food truck, to the final, to the final meal that you're getting served. And I was like, we could bring in everybody that is involved in the, off the grid ecosystem in a way that like really makes them feel connected to the food and the source and the people making it. And he was like, you're hired. Let's tell more of a story. Yeah. We never actually told that story, but
yeah, so I think it's I'm glad I was about to ask like what happened with the story with the tomato, because you kind of hinted that, so I'm glad you told that story. But I think it's also really impressive how the difference that telling stories about the people behind the food made the difference, and not just focusing on the food porn aspect of it, like you mentioned, where people, when they know more about the person preparing the food, it makes the food better than if you just hype up what the food is itself. Totally. Because there's so much more meaning when you feel connected to a particular truck, or like the chefs behind the truck, or if you've that shared experience and value what is probably the best spice you could possibly add to a dish.
Yeah.
And so I think and that was really impressive for 6 months to get that kind of turnaround on social media and like media campaigns in general, compared to what most companies are struggling with when it comes to engagement and turnout and all those sort of things. All the KPIs they track. You get those results from telling great stories, and so it's just such a obvious. I mean, for us, it seems obvious, but it kind of baffles me how many companies have forgotten how important this is.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're probably coming back around to it. Where the smart ones are, at least.
Yeah, and so I think it's for those that are. I know you do amazing workshops and these events where you're coaching people. So, but I'm sure there's some ways, like simple tips or tricks people can start applying like right away to help get their momentum in the right direction if they're listening and go, oh man, I totally want to have the same sort of impact on our social that you just described that you did for off the grid. So what is like your kind of the low hanging fruit that people can start to do like right now to get the ball rolling in the right direction?
Yeah. Okay. I think it's first figuring out all the stories that you do have to tell. So there's a founder's origin story. There's a founder's, journey to discovery story and all the obstacles along the way to like launching this thing or doing this thing or getting it to where it is today, right? There's the customer story. And one of the first things I do when I go into any startup, especially if it's a more established startup or business, I interview customer service first. I interview the sales team next. And then finally, I talk to the founder in marketing. Like, we won't even go there until I get a really clear idea from the people who are constantly on the front lines, talking to the people that are being served, and dealing with objections and all the problems and frequently asked questions, and say, okay, what kind of stories do we need to tell related to, what our customers care about, what they're struggling with, or, what they're hesitant around not buying the solution or going to this thing or using this product or service. So just start there, start mining your own organization and all the people involved in it for those stories, for that information. And then I also really like, employees that are, not all of them are okay sharing or want to, but you'd be surprised how many are. Some of them are interested in building their own personal brand, but they're willing to share their story of why and how they're bought into the mission of the company, right? Why they work there, why it's meaningful for them, like why they chose to do this and get paid and, for this job versus any other, and creating that connection even just within. And that's, that kind of storytelling, I will say, like, there's really, there's a lot of great examples on TikTok and Instagram of brands that are doing that, and really like highlighting the employees and using them and giving you more of an insight into what's going on, in addition to highlighting customers.
Yeah, I think that's a great advice for leaders who are wondering how they can find these stories or what stories they can tell, is just to start. You don't have to come up with them yourself. You already probably have them in your business. You just have to ask the right questions of the right people. And like I said, the front line, and talking to your customers, preferably your, like the best ones are the ones that are coming back, or the ones that are kind of the most vocal ones that, like, because if the ones that are like there's a great consultant I work with who, and his whole thing is helping people attract more of their best clients. If you listen to them and ask them like, okay, what inspired you to buy? What do you enjoy about this? What is it, the difference that made you go, okay, I'm going to work with these people?
Yeah.
They'll tell you these stories about like things that you had no idea was the difference maker. And it might be that someone on like an employee on like in your sales team or like the customer support is doing something that made the difference. That you have no idea was like the main decision, like the driving factor. And so if you ask people and listen to what really inspired them to make the decision, it's 100% of the time is going to be something that you're not compared to, like the features and benefits, all like the rational things that people think of why they buy from you. It's going to be something that's really deep and emotional and personal in most cases.
Yeah.
And so if you take the time to ask people and listen to them, they're going to tell you these amazing stories that you can use to inspire other people that are like them to want to work with you. And if you're talking to your best clients about that, you're going to attract more people like them and less of the ones that you're pulling your hair out when they call to hassle you about something.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, people make decisions based on emotion, and then they justify it with logic.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the problems that companies make, is that they'll send out like a survey to their customer base saying, oh, why'd you buy this thing? And it's superficial. And so people, when they answer a survey like that, they don't use the same part of their brain they're using when they make buying decisions. And so you get this inaccurate information. But if you actually talk to them preferably in person and like go deeper, ask the next question, and
really get to the why, because sometimes they don't totally recognize why bought this thing or why they came to this solution versus another one. You really got to dig for that.
Yeah, but going through that process, and that's something I do with clients as well, is just like is that asking that next question, digging deeper, and really understanding the why behind the decision.
Mm-hmm.
That gets to you to the real meaty stories that have real persuasive power for people, because it's going to touch on something that's part of the human experience. That's a real thing that other people can relate to, and not just, oh, I like the color.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's the same thing with your like the employees, especially if you're like B2B, where it seems like it's so impersonal, but there's still these relationships with reps and stuff, and the customer experience is driven by these employees that are dealing with them on a daily basis. So if you're sharing stories about your employees, about how awesome they are as human beings, that's going to get other clients like, hey, I want to have a relationship with this person if I'm working with this company, because that sounds like someone I enjoy getting a call from, or I enjoy helping troubleshoot my issues and stuff. And that makes the whole experience more of a community and less of a transaction. And that's what people really want from the work experiences they're getting from their daily lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
So you said, I want to emphasize this. So you talk to customer support first,
Mm-hmm.
and the customers, then you talk to sales, then you talk to marketing and leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And so can you just reemphasize the importance of that order? Because I think a lot of people start with, let's talk to leadership and marketing first.
Yeah.
So why that order, and what's the...
I think you just, and especially the larger the organization gets, the more siloed you become. And I think that a lot of founders and marketing departments think they know, or like have an idea, or think they have an idea of what it is people care about or want to see or are struggling with. But like, they usually are slightly disconnected from it. And there's also a lot of founders that have a hard time disconnecting what they want and think from what their customers want and think, right? Or respond to. And it's hard, especially at founder-led businesses, to really, draw that line. So I think with anything, you just get the data. If you have the data, then you can make a better point, right? Or make a better case for yourself. If something needs to change, or you need to take a different approach, or you need to tell different stories, it's like I have a higher success rate of convincing people in leadership to make changes after collecting the necessary data.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense if you can point to, like, I'm not saying this, your customers are saying this. You want more customers, right?
Right. That's what I'm getting this for, right?
Do you have a certain, like, obviously you can't just talk to one customer. You can't just talk to one sales rep. You can't just talk to one, like, depending on the size of the company, what's a good, like, do you talk to everyone in the department, or like, what's the point where, because if it's like a really big company that has lots of different customer support teams, like, do you have like a good ratio for like how much of a department you have to talk to before you get a good sense of it? Is it something kind of gather, you get kind of a gut feeling after a certain point?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say like 2 or 3 people in each department. And sometimes, I work with a lot of startups, so sometimes it's one person. They have a very limited amount of data there is. So.
Okay, that makes sense. Because I imagine there's some larger companies like, oh, we want to talk to our customer support team, but it's like, oh, we have like 50 people, and it's going to be...
Yeah, no. It's just like surveys, really. And when you start doing in-depth interviews, I think 10 is sort of a sweet spot for a lot of people. It depends on the organization, depends on the business size.
It also probably would depend on how much data you have to collect to convince the leadership that you have like a good sample size. Like, this is not just a flash in the pan. It's actual, right. Like, so yeah. So I just want to get, because I think a lot of people, when they think, oh, I have to talk to all these people, it's going to take a huge amount of time. It's like, well, no, if you talk to like 2 or 3 into each department and get a sense of, if you get like 3 wildly different stories, maybe you talk more, but if you get like a consistent, like they're all talking about the same sort of things, and you probably have a good sense of what the reality is.
Yeah.
And it's not as much of a task as you might think to get this sort of information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then and they, like you said, with the example of the tomato story, when you do it right, you get some really amazing results. So that's, I'd love that, the story about the off the grid thing. So thank you so much for connecting with me today, Renee. And if you enjoyed this episode of the Human Connection podcast, please like, leave a review, and share it. If you'd like to connect with myself or Renee, please check out the links in the show notes. And remember, no matter if your business is B2B or B2C, it's really H to H, human to human. Happy connecting.